Hi Shakira, just responding to your message about some advice on your brochure. Just a couple of things. So first of all, I didn't notice any of the logos being any different. They're both just reversed, so they're both white or paper on a solid. So I don't see the difference, to tell you the truth. Okay, so just a couple of things to check. So making sure that we have in our separations no CMYK, which it looks like there's no, so if I hide these two, there's no CMYK left, aside from the folds. So that's good. So that works. Okay, just layout, some layout and typography issues, or not really issues, just suggestions, and some of the things I would avoid doing. So first of all, in terms of imagery, in a way, it looks to me like you're kind of avoiding, going beyond your grid in terms of design. I would suggest that you explore going beyond this grid that you've got here and pushing it a little bit more. So I would probably push out the ballerina all the way out to the bleed. Okay, it just looks a lot nicer. It's not so stringent, the design, when you bring it out. So I just move the text down. Maybe even experiment with making the title Cinderella a little bit bigger. I do like what you did there, though. It's pretty nice design. The other thing is you're too reliant on centering things off. Try and experiment with balancing things off left and right as well. Okay, so for instance, with this, you've got the logo centered off. Why not to the left, and then the text to the left as well. Same thing here. All of this is centered, and it's a safe option. It tends to work. But why not experiment with justification to the left or the right or whatever, right? So I would experiment with that as well. So I kind of tend to like it leaning left a little bit more, so I just justified it to the left. Same with the title, justifying it to the left, which kind of means, I could experiment with having this logo closer to the right instead, or over to the left, but then it starts to get a bit weighty to the left. Same thing with this. Experiment with, maybe you can center it off, but not justify the text to the center. Maybe you can center the text off. Whoops. I hate when you can't shrink that unless you zoom in. But move this across. Just experiment with your justification, because I think you're taking the easy option here by centering everything off. Please don't use this. Is the sign of an amateur. Okay, when you're using heaps of spacing to space things out, this is not what us graphic designers should be doing. Okay, so if you want to space things off, use tabs and use your tab control. So under type, you've got this thing called tabs. Okay, I can lock that onto where that used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. It's supposed to lock onto the text that you've got selected. So when I hit a tab, I can then control the distance in space between those two rather than using the space. Please don't use the space. And so I can bring out a tab guide, which allows me to control the spacing between the two. Okay, now you've done the same thing with the text over here as well. So please use tabs for this. Don't use. Looks like I pulled it out accidentally. Please use tabs for this. Don't use spacing. Okay, that's what amateurs do, and that's what people who don't know how to use this software use. Okay, even in Microsoft Word, you have options for controlling tab. So the same thing here, right? It's one of my most hated things. So what I tend to do when I check through type is if I go to type and show hidden characters, it shows me what's going on here, right? So multiple paragraphs for creating extra space is a no-no. So you don't do multiple paragraphs, so you don't do something like this for creating extra space. Instead, if you want to create extra space under your paragraph settings, so and that's under properties as well, under paragraph settings, you do a space after, okay, and that will control, that gives you direct control over the space in between lines, or paragraphs more like it, yeah? So space before or space after paragraph. If you want to control space in between characters, you don't do this either, okay? So that, you can see these spaces here, that should not be happening here. Okay, tabs, please use tabs. Because when you use tabs, you can really align this properly, right? So you've got options for how you want to control that spacing. Okay. Don't know what's going on there. It's to do with the typography. Do you have extra spacing there? No, maybe it's just the font itself. Okay, so what you can do from there is if you select all of the text, except for the title, you can go to, again, type and tabs, and you can control that tab. So you can tell the text on that right side to be right justified, right? So they're all right justified, as you can see there, and so they all follow that right justification, like that. Although I don't really appreciate this kind of, I know what you're trying to do here, but this river of whiteness just doesn't look great. Yeah, so you could again experiment with maybe a left justified space instead. Okay, so you don't have that river of whiteness there. And I still seem to have overset text here for some reason. So you've got some text that's actually hanging across here. And I don't seem to understand why that. Usually, okay. It's probably the way you justified it here. So that shouldn't. So don't justify it like this. Just keep it left justified, and that will allow you to control the spacing here. Okay. It just looks like there's just not enough space for all that text there. So I can see what you're trying to do, but maybe just change that to right justified. Okay, oh, I've got two now. There we go. So at least you've got a little bit more control over that text now, as you can see. Okay. I kind of still don't like, you might need to reconsider redesigning this a bit. I don't know, there's something about this that it just doesn't settle well for me. There's just this huge gap of, blankness here. It just doesn't seem balanced. So what font? So you've got 12 point. Maybe experiment with making this smaller font. It's just that really long name at the end, I think, that causes the issue. But I mean, even there's still a bit of a gap, but it just seems like it corresponds a little bit more. You can kind of tell what goes with what there. So I just changed the font size. This is fine. The other thing I would say is experiment with this. Again, I think you're playing it too safe with this thing. So I probably would have stretched this out a bit more. So I'm actually going to stretch the frame out all the way to the bleed. Okay, and then I'm going to tell the frame to fill proportionally. I would then, now you've got your layers there, and I think the way you set up your layers is pretty logical. So you've got your cover there and set up. I think you've got your background and your setup here. Maybe rename these a little bit. So I would probably send this image back. And of course, that's going to make it look kind of a bit strange here. So in order to soften that a little bit, probably grab this. And since this is not a solid, this is a duotone mixture, probably best to use, so you can see here it's not actually assigned any colors. And if I was to click on this, no colors assigned to that either. Right, so the best option for this is to use an opacity, which usually I try to avoid, but sometimes in order to get the effect you want. So I would copy, I would copy this and put it into probably the same layer. So this is in the cover too. Yeah, so probably put in the same layer as the cover. Edit, paste in place. You can see there's a really long shortcut key for that. And then shrink that to the size of your, probably about there, size of your column, and then drop it down. So I'm using a shortcut key, but you can always right click, arrange, and send to back, or send backwards, or whatever. Right, so looks like I need to send it forward a little bit more. So again, arrange, and you can bring forward. Obviously, bring to front means bring it all the way up. So I'm just using these shortcut keys to move it around, and so I can make this maybe 80% transparent, so that you can just see some of that graphic. So yeah, I would suggest, and in fact probably make this go all the way to the fold. Wrong one. Make that go all the way to the fold. So I would suggest you experiment a little bit more. I think you're playing it a little bit too safe with your design. So it's almost there, I'd say. You know, you just need to push it just that little bit more. Again, with these logos and stuff, with your stuff centering, try and experiment without, you know, relying on that centering. Same with this, you know. Obviously, when you justify left, you're going to get widows and orphans, which you don't necessarily want. But again, you can experiment with just a trick as well. I usually use the shortcut Command or Control Y. That brings up the story editor, which basically just shows the text, and it tells me where the overset text is as well. Right, so I can select that and say I want to change this to 12 point. So it's 12 point. Or you know, you can have 13 point if you want, or something like that. And then I would experiment with just making sure actually no widows there, no orphans, which is good. So I think that's pretty good as is. You could maybe experiment with a little bit of tracking. Oops, I have to select the text first. Oh, I have selected it. It's just not that visible. Sometimes it won't update, so I might just close this and highlight it from here. So just making sure that we're not getting those. So now I've just gotten a widow or an orphan there. So we can experiment with, and again, see, you don't do this. So if you want to space paragraphs, you don't do this. Okay, so you remove these. And so these should not be controlled. So this is what's causing most of your problems. Is you've got paragraphs where you shouldn't have paragraphs like this, because you're trying to control where things are, and this is not how you control typography. Okay, so Wicked Stepmother with fantastic additions. So I would say, you know, this area here, get rid of all the paragraphs except for that one. Okay, so we could, there is a way, find and replace, so Control F or Command F. There's a way to kind of get rid of things altogether. So for instance, I want to get rid of all of these paragraphs. So I want to remove, where is it? Multiple returns to single return. Change all. Oh, okay, so it's not letting me, because I got rid of a lot of those. Let me just undo that just so you can see. So if I do the same thing, change all, you'll notice it gets rid of all of the returns in that text. But now you've put returns where you really shouldn't have. So you shouldn't have returns unless it's the end of a paragraph, right? So where it's at the end of a paragraph, that's where you should have returns. And this is a M dash, so that should actually be joined together. So I would say there's a return here, and I'll get rid of this. America, Genius. And so with the word and there's no end of paragraph there, so there shouldn't be a return there. Here's Cinderella, so this would be another paragraph there. Here's Cinderella, the acclaimed, blah, blah, blah. Takes its own vision and projections. And adoring. So there really shouldn't be returns where the paragraph hasn't finished. And we're going to see why. So there would be an end of paragraph there as well after playing blah, blah, blah. Now, if you want that extra spacing, you add that extra spacing in the space after. So again, if you switch to down here, so usually with the properties over here, you have to actually go to little 3 dots. So you can access more information, which you can see here. So that's the space after there. And so now I can actually control the space between those paragraphs. So that's what you should be doing to control that. Also, it looks like you have, so if you take a look here, hyphenate is on. Okay, so if I untick hyphenate, that removes the hyphenation so it doesn't break apart words. That can actually add to your widows and orphans. In this case, it hasn't though, as you can see. Okay, so here you can have a lot more control over, you know, the spacing of those paragraphs, as you can see, which allows you to have a little more control over the, you know, the look of your thing. So please don't hit extra returns. Don't use spacing to space things out. This is not what we do as graphic designers. And the other one was leading, I think. So if I go back to here, I might just increase that leading a little bit. This could throw off your design sometimes. So it's at 14 now. So what does 18 look like? Probably too much. So I might just reel it back a little bit to 16 or something like that. So now again, as you can see, you know, nice spacing. We do have a ragged edge here, but it's not so bad, you know, and we're not relying on centering everything off. Yeah, so this looks like a nice body of text now, nice and balanced. There really needs to be a balance between these two as well. So this doesn't really line up with this. So you want to kind of start to consider maybe either dropping this to match that. Okay, so that it has this nice kind of flow to it as the reader goes through it. Okay, so those are the changes that I would suggest. Experiment, please. Yeah, so don't take the easy option. So usually that's again another sign of an amateur is that you take the easy option of just justifying everything to the center. Experiment with white space. Experiment with drawing the viewer through the information. Just remember that these are breakups as well, right? So we're really looking at that panel, then that panel, then that. We're not looking at all of this in one go, okay? When we open this up, we tend to see this in one go. So we want a flow throughout all of these panels. When we've got this cover here, this cover's usually closed, so we don't tend to open it up and look at it all in one go. We kind of see it in bits and pieces. Okay, so here we have a little more control in how we can control the flow of information for the user. Same thing with these panels here. Okay, but yeah, so those are the suggestions I would make for yours. Other than that, I love your colors. I like your choice of text. I do like this, the way that you set up the title for Cinderella. Okay, and I like how you've been experimenting with shapes and typography. Just play around a little bit more with these paragraphs of text. Okay, all right. Hopefully this helps.